Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to SpeedTutor, and today we're going to be looking at creating a mobile phone UI and looking at how to create the UI with all the different buttons, menus, panels, and everything from there, managing the content with grid layouts, vertical layouts, being able to look at content when you get, say, text messages as an example, to be able to change the battery icons, setting sliders, changing the time. We can look at this content, say text messages, looking at ScriptableObjects, and then being able to click these and show the actual information that we want to be able to see when we click on it. And then I'll show you how to add the scripts to be able to choose and set at the start what time it is, how you can affect these sliders, the buttons, and everything you need to know. And be sure to let me know what you think and if you want any improvements or you have any improvements to showcase. So be sure to check out my Patreon to get access to over 145 different scripts, assets and projects you cannot find anywhere else. And be sure to check out all the links in the description for all the content which I'll show you in this video and all the savings that you can make across Unity, Game Dev and so much more for this month. And before we start, I'm just going to mention that all the UI sprites that I'm going to use and all this actual asset itself will be available on my Patreon, but you can find these online or create them yourselves, but it's just to get us an easy start to getting it going. So to get yourself started, we want to start by creating the canvas. So we can right click in the hierarchy, go UI and just choose a canvas. And then I'm just going to rename this to my smartphone canvas, and then we're going to set the scale with screen height and size to 1920 by 1080, and then we're going to set our scene to the 2D mode, and then we'll right click and we're just going to add our phone UI or background to this. So I'm just going to have a UI and I'm just going to have this as image, and I'm just going to call this the phone BG, and in the slot I'm just going to add my smartphone background, which is the UI sprite, and you can see it here. It's just 1024 by 2048, and I've cut out the middle of this phone, so it's just the front of the phone, but I've cut out the middle so we can put our own UI elements in there. So what we can scale this up is we can half the width and the resolution, so we could say 512 by 1024, and you could scale this to the tops of the canvas if you want, but I'll just leave it like this so there's a little bit of space on either edge. Now what we're going to do is create a panel, so we can right click our canvas again, say UI, and choose a panel. And the panel is going to be where everything's really going to sit. So we're going to position this on the inside of our phone, and we're just going to scale this down. We're going to fit the gap roughly where we want it. And what I recommend is that you remove the image component from it. Now when we click on our panel, you can see that panel is just the inside of that phone. So I'm just going to name this my phone panel. And inside this phone panel, we're going to have a bunch of images. So I'm going to add a new image, and this is going to act as our top part, and we can snap this to the top, drag it all the way across, and I'm just going to scale this to roughly how I might want to position my sort of top bar that I've got, which will hold the battery, the number, and the signal. So we can do something like that, and I'm going to rename that image to the top bar. And with that being said, I'm going to make sure that it's got no specific sprite, and I'm going to make sure that's almost fully black, but I'm just going to offset it slightly. So that's going to act as our top bar. Then we could duplicate this and we could pull it down here, and this could be our just panel name. And then I'm going to duplicate it again and add it to the bottom, and this is going to be our lower buttons. And then what we're going to have UI in the middle, and this is going to be all the content that we're going to have, which will be our main buttons that we'll have. So I'm just going to name this I'm just going to have this called main buttons underscore background, and that's going to be like it there. I'm going to make sure it's got no sprite, and I'm just going to sort of change itself to a bit of a darker purple here so we can see it. I'm going to look at my lower buttons, and I'm going to make sure that that is also a purple color, but maybe slightly lighter, and we'll do the same for the panel name. We'll make sure it is the same as our lower, and we can do that by selecting our lower buttons, clicking on the color, and we can set a new color swatch that we want to use, and I can go back onto my top element, click on the color swatch, and it's exactly the same. So we've got something going on here. Now for my panel name, what I'm just going to do is right click, choose UI, and then choose text for Text Mesh Pro, and I'm just going to import Text Mesh Pro because we want to use the settings from it. Now with that being said, we can just have this as our name UI, and I will just make sure that we center this object and it's perfectly in our box. I'm just going to name this our main menu, something like that. Now I can drag it and make sure it's in the center so we can have it something like this. So in our lower buttons, what we can make sure that we do is we can right click, go UI and choose button with Text Mesh Pro, and you can see my button down here. And what I might do is I might keep this in the very center, because we can do that by snapping it to the center, and I'll just scale my button out. What I'm going to do there is actually remove the Text Mesh Pro component. I'm going to right click, choose UI and then choose image. And with that selected, I'm going to hold shift and scale this down slightly and put that in the middle of my specific button. Then I'm just going to add my back arrow, make sure that I maybe show my button in red, and then we can go back onto the actual button element itself and make sure that I'm just going to take off the UI sprite from it and give it the same color as what we had before. And then this would still act as a button, so we could highlight over it so it would change its color, as you can see here, and it will act as a normal full button in Unity. Now we can look at the top bar elements, so looking at the battery and the time and the sort of signal that we might want to use. So with the battery, I'll right click the top bar, choose UI and then choose image. And then I'm just going to hold shift and scale this image down slightly just so I can fit it into this box. Then what we're going to do to the sprite is I'm going to add it to the battery icon outline, and then I'm just going to maybe set the width to about 70 and set the height to 35, and I get something that looks more like a battery, and we can keep it centered on this center line here. Then underneath the battery, we're just going to call this the battery BG. Then I'm going to right click that, choose UI and then choose slider. And with that slider being selected, I'm just going to name this to battery level slider. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it all out, remove the handle from it. I'm going to choose the handle slide area and make sure that's all the way across in either case, so it's right to the end. I'm going to go to the fill and make sure that I use the rectangle 512 by 256. So this is going to just make sure that it fills across with the rectangle, but also I'm going to make sure that the fill area is all the way to the ends too. And then what I'm going to do is also remove the background, and then you can see that my value moves all the way from there to there. Now with the actual fill, we need to make sure that this is scaled all the way down to the end, so you almost can't see it anymore. But now when we move the actual slider, you can see that it moves perfectly from 0 to solid. Now with the whole slider being selected, we can just scale this whole thing down, and we can keep the center line like before, and we can just fit this into our battery indicator box. And we'll need to scale this out slightly because it's slightly bigger than our sprite. Slider selected. Now you can see that I can move across and we get an indicator which will actually move. Now that's great. In the top bar again, we can have the percentage amount. So now we can add Text Mesh Pro text again, and I'm just going to give this a value of 100. Then I'm going to set the text size at about 14, make sure that it's centered, and I'm just going to scale this whole thing down a lot because we're never going to be any bigger than a value of 100. I'll put this on the center line again. I'm going to rename this Text Mesh Pro to battery percent value. I'll just parent this to the battery background because it's going to be part of the same thing. Now I'm going to right click this UI and Text Mesh Pro again. We're going to again put that to 14, and I'm just going to put a percent sign because this is something that's never going to move. Then now if I scale that, make sure that it's centered and middled, make sure that's as big as our 100%, and just put that in line, and you can see it down here. And if we grab the percentage value, we can just move those together and position that where we may want. And then we're going to be able to adjust this too. So now with our top bar, we might want to add the time. So we can write UI and then choose panel again. So this is the entire panel for this section again. We can just name this to time background. And then I'm going to right click, choose the UI, and then I'm just going to choose Text Mesh Pro again. Then I'm going to name this to hours, and I could set this to, let's say, 13 as a pure example, and I'm going to keep that at a value of around 36. Make sure I center it again. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just scale this down, and I'm going to put this to my center line. then what I'm going to do is duplicate hours and call this an actual colon or something that will go in between, which will never change. So I'll add that in and I'll put that directly on my center line again, duplicate again and rename this to minutes. And then we could have 44, something like this. And again, I'm just going to drag it to the left hand side of my center line. And then if you need to, you might want to just scale out either side. So you look at the scale that we're giving it. So you can see the width as being about 55. So we'll make sure we'll get that 55 off the center line. We'll go back to the 13 again, and we'll add that to 55 on the size of it. And we can pull that out and we get that directly in the center like we wanted. Now with the time BG, you can remove the image component because we don't really need that to specifically do anything. It's just to hold the UI there. Now the last thing, we might want our signal. So again, we can go on the top bar, right click UI and panel again. We can remove the image component, change this to signal icons, and then we can right click, choose UI and image. And in this case, I might want this to be signal bars UI. I'll hold shift and I'll scale this down, and I want it to just be in this corner over here. And then for the image, I'm going to add this to it can be my signal bars sprite that I've got. And you can scale this down and choose what sort of size you want this to be. And then if we wanted an example of no signal, we can go to UI and choose Text Mesh Pro again. And then I'm just going to rename this to no signal UI. Just going to rename the text box to no signal. I'll change the text size to about 12. I'll make sure I center and align it. And I'm just going to also scale this down, and I'll keep it the same size as the height. And I'm just going to put this directly in the center, roughly where it is. So we can be able to swap between these two sprites if we want. So we've got this set up so we can programmatically change any of the features. Now what I'm going to do inside my main panel, I'm going to UI and choose panel again, but in this case I'm just going to scale this panel down and make sure that it meets the top and along the bottom, that we're just going to, this is going to be our main content here, or the main buttons, or any of the main content. So this can be menu, main menu, buttons, and then we can remove the image component again because we're just going to use this as a container. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating some buttons. So I'm going to right click on this, choose UI and choose button with Text Mesh Pro. With that being said, I'm going to scale this to about 120 by 120, and you can adjust these as you wish. I'm going to change this to maybe a green. And then in this case, I don't want the text that's in there. I'm going to right click, choose UI and choose image. And I'm just going to I just leave this as a default image. And then I'm going to set the UI sprite as maybe my letter icon, which could be classed as male that we've got. And then I'm going to scale the width and the height to about 80 and 80. And on this, we could also add an outline component, just so that we can outline that icon in the UI. And you could then name this to messaging button. I could just duplicate that 8 other times, so we now have 9 buttons. And then what I'm going to do on our main buttons, and then we're going to add a component called grid layout group. And this allows us to specifically lay the grid out, and we can use padding, cell size, and other things like this. So now we can see that we can set cell size. I'm going to set the spacing to about 15 on the X and 15 on the Y, so we get a little bit of space in between them. I'm going to keep the start corner in the upper left. I'm going to keep it on horizontal. I'm going to set this to middle center because I want them all centralized. I'm going to have a fixed row count, and I'm going to make sure that my fixed row count is set to 4 so I can fit them in those spaces. Then I want the cell sizes, maybe I can have them all as 120 by 120, so they fit nicely in the box. And of course, you can adjust any of the settings like the padding, the cell size, or the widths, anything that you want. And no matter, even if we add more, it will still fit as long as we don't go over the bounds of what we want, and it'll just fit nicely. And off screen, I'm just going to change all the buttons because all I need to do is just change the image icon on each. And also, if you do like my content, be sure to leave a like and be subscribed to always be kept up to date to what I'm making. So now with all this set up, we're going to look at some of the actions that the buttons can do and be able to change, maybe have a script which controls the time, which controls the specific battery, being able to control some of the buttons. Like, I do have a tutorial which I'll link in the description, which can show you how to take images. So when you press this button, you could launch that script. The settings menu could be a settings menu, like I've got another entire main menu or settings menu tutorial that you can check out. And then other things, these are just sort of some placeholder icons. The context could be held in a scriptable object, but I will show you all in this case to do messages and some of the basic things at the top, so you can get some ideas of how you can possibly manage this sort of thing. So okay, we're going to create a new script and call this our smartphone controller, and this is going to control the UI elements at the top. So okay, to do that, we're going to use the using Unity Engine.ui and using TM Pro, which is the two namespaces that we're going to need to use. So we want to be able to change the signal icons. We want to be able to change the battery and the actual time that we have, and I've just got some headers to be able to create that. So first of all, we need two specific bulls for showing the no signal UI and showing the signal bars, and I've just got them as a serialized field and to be able to use. And we're going to also create two new fields, which are just game objects, which are the actual UIs themselves to turn them on and off. For the battery level, we want a flow of the battery start value, so what it should be at the start of the game. We need a reference to our slider, so this is the battery level slider. And then we also want to update the text that's next to it, so we can do the tmpro_text and we have the battery percentage text value. Then for our time is going to be the hours and the minutes, so we'll have an integer of start hours and start minutes. And then like before, we'll have references to the TextMesh Pro text for the hours and minutes that we're going to update. So first of all, we'll say on void start, we're going to set some things on the actual start method itself, so that we can say that if underscore show no signal is true at any point, no signal UI.setActive is true, and the signal bars is false. And then very similarly, where if we set an if statement to show the signal bars, we will set the other one to true and false. Then under here, we'll say that our hours text UI.text is equal to the start hours that we want to set based on toString and in quotes a 0, which is just setting the hours, which is a variable, to a string, which we can display in the box. And of course, we can do minutes text UI.text equals our start minutes dot toString in exactly the same way. And if we want to be able to set our battery at any point, we need to create a method, or we're going to use a method to be able to set it in real time anyway. So we can just say that we want to update the battery slider, but in any case, we can say that the underscore battery level slider.value is equal to the underscore battery start value. So I actually want to be able to adjust this, that when I move the actual battery level on screen, that I can do it too. So if I say public void battery level slider, float and our local parameter of battery level, then with that being the case, when we move the actual slider itself, we can say that the battery percentage text value dot text is equal to our battery level dot toString, and then in brackets and then quotes. So then what we can do here is you can reference that method at the start, so it will make sure it'll update our slider visually as well as the actual number that we have. So in this case, we're going to say that the battery level slider, and then in open brackets, we'll say that we can set this to our battery start value. So it's just going to run this method. So this one updates the slider on screen, and this one updates the text of the percentage that we want to update. We can create an empty game object and call this our smartphone controller. I'm going to add my script, and then we're going to say that we need to add all the elements that we need. So we're going to add the signal bars UI and the no signal bars. Then we need to make sure that our battery start value, let's say could be 50%. Then the battery level slider is we'll select it. Then also the battery percentage is, we can select that too. Then our start hours could be, let's say 15, and then our start minutes could be 22. And then we make sure that we add our hours text and then our minutes text. And then remember that if we select our slider, we need to make sure that it's out of a value of 100. So then we'll keep it at 100 to start with. So min value 0, max value 100. So now when we press play, you can see that the time changes, our percentage changes, and so does our battery. And that would change if we specified. So then we can, if we adjusted this, we need to connect this up in the inspector. So if we go onto the battery level slider and do the on changed event, we'll add the smartphone controller and make sure that we add the public battery level slider. And also on our smartphone controller, we can say show no signal in this case. And we can say, okay, then we've got no signal. We've got the time which we'd set. And now we can adjust our battery to be whatever we want in real time. Say we need to knock the time down or adjust it when we're playing. You might want to create this hours into a float value so that we can do 0.2 or something like that, just to keep it relevant to this. And also, if you do like my content, be sure to leave a like and be subscribed to always be kept up to date to what I'm making. And now what we might want to do is when we click on this button, it will show us a bunch of text messages that we might have already received. And when we click on a text message, it will open up a bigger version of that text message, and we can use ScriptableObjects. And this is just one example, one way, and you can do this in a million ways. And I'm not saying it's the best, but it's just to give you an example of how you can do it. With the, say, the menu buttons, we're just going to duplicate this because that's just a panel we already have. I'm just going to get rid of all the buttons from inside there because it's just something we don't need. I'm going to just get rid of the main menu buttons at the moment, and we've got this panel now. So this panel can be our text messages menu. Then from there, what I want to do with my text messages, I want to be able to create a scroll view or a list to be able to showcase them. So I'll right click it, go UI, and just create a scroll view. And what I'm going to do is get rid of the grid layout group, grab the scroll view, put it to the top corner, make sure that it encapsulates the entirety of that section again, and I'm just going to remove the actual image component from it because we don't need a background on this scroll view. On the settings, I just want it to only move vertical, so I don't need the horizontal movement of it. I'm just going to have this as clamped because I don't want it to do anything crazy. I don't want any inertia, so I don't want it to sort of move around very easily. I'm just going to keep it at 1, and then I'm going to keep the viewport, the scroll bar, and I'm just going to have this as auto hide because, as I said, I didn't need the horizontal one. And I'm just going to name this visibility as permanent because we want to be able to scroll up and down if, say, we've got PC input and not actual input from a touch. Now we can open this up and we can look at the viewport, and the viewport is just literally a mask of things that we can put inside it. Then we have inside the viewport, we've got something called content, and content is all the things that are going to appear when we push it down. And we can grab all this content and make sure we add it, just drag it all the way down to the bottom to scale it out. We can right click the content, choose UI, and I'm just going to choose a button with Text Mesh Pro. Now I'm going to add this to the top, and I'm going to scale it out roughly where the end of that is. Now I'm just going to leave it as UI sprite. I am just going to take the opacity down slightly, and then I'm going to leave the button settings as default, and I'm just going to open it up. And you can see the Text Mesh Pro here. I'm just going to name this to title, and this is going to be set to the far left and the top. And then I'm just going to squeeze this up just to make sure that it fits. I'm just going to maybe scale the text down slightly, and you can see it there. I'm going to change the text color to white so we can see it a little bit easier. Then I'm going to duplicate that text, and I'm just going to name this as the text message info, and then from there I'm just going to drag this down below the other. I'm just going to snap it to the edges, and we can just have some random content here which could be for our text message that we're going to receive. This, when we've got our button, it can just be our text message 1. When I duplicate it, it's just going to duplicate over the top, and it's not really going to organize the content like I would want it. So if we click back on the content organization, then we can add something called the vertical layout group, which is going to control everything in a vertical layout. We'll have the spacing as fine like that. We can have everything as, say, middle left, so you can see it here, and then we'll keep this as width, and that's fine. Now when we duplicate our text messages, you can see that it will fill up exactly like this, and that's what we wanted it to do. Now on this as well, when you duplicate it, it will go off screen and won't control it very well. So again, on content, we need to add something called content size fitter, and this will make sure it fits everything inside that scroll view that we want to see. So the horizontal fit can be unconstrained because we don't care about it, and the vertical fit needs to be min size. So then it will snap it to the top, and then when we do this, it will fit it exactly where we want and all the way down, and we can scroll up this, as you can see that the bar gets bigger, and we can scroll through all of that content that we might need. So we can get rid of it and we can start out with that. What we can also do to showcase our text message that we might want, we'll just duplicate that panel again, and I'm going to get rid of the scroll view this time. I'm going to hide the menu, and I'm just going to name this as text message display, and then in here I'm just going to right click UI and just choose Text Mesh Pro, and then I'm going to snap this to the top, and this is again going to be my title, and this under here is then going to be the text description, and I'm just going to lob this below here, scroll down, and make sure that it snaps nicely to the content we have. I'm going to set this to about 35. The title is bigger than that. So now we've got a place to display the main text message, and we've also got a way to display the text message just when we have them. What we're going to do from here is we're going to create a scriptable object to hold specific types of messages that we might have. So what I'm going to do here is right click C#, and I'm just going to call this text message, and this is going to be the scriptable object that we're going to create, and we'll open up in Visual Studio. So with this being created, we can just have a public class, and it's got this text message inherits from mono behavior. We don't need that. We're just going to say that it is a scriptable object at this point. We're going to also write that we want to create, or have a way to be able to create it, so that we can use square brackets, create asset menu, and then in brackets file name equals the text messages. So when we right click and go create, we can choose a text message that we create. In here, we can say that we've got a public string called message name, so who it's from, and then a public string of message content. You could make this a text area if you wish, just if you want to make it more visible. So when you go back into Unity and you right click create and we choose text message, you can see that my message name is here, and also my message content is here, and it's still a string. It's just a bigger field to be able to put this into. So we could name this Dave McGee. Of course, you could name this to nicknames, and you could give this different names. I left it as a name field, so we could give it like nicknames or whatever we want. And there's his content. He's a really big fan of what I do, and he hopes that everybody subscribes. So what a great guy Dave is. We can open up our menu, which has all of our text messages on, and then we can go to the content again, and we can go to text message 1, and we need a way to sort of handle the information that we have in this. So this one is just going to be a sample script of text message handle. It's not going to be very advanced because it could be another tutorial to go much more in depth into this. I'm just going to give you a base example of how you could manage the content. We want to using TM Pro, and then from there we want to be able to say in square brackets serialized field private, we want to reference our scriptable object, which is the text message at any one time, and I'm just going to give this a field name of text message. Then we want to reference the UI, which is going to be TM Pro underscore text, the text name and the text description. And then what I'm going to do is on awake on each of these buttons, I'm going to set textName.text equal to the scriptable object message name and the scriptable object message content. So it just fills that in for us. So now if we go on to message 1 and add the text message handler to that object is looking for a text message, which we can put in Dave McGee. And we want to add the title and the description for this. And if we now press play, you can say that Dave Mac, and there's the content that which we filled. Now, again, if we duplicate that at this point and have this as text message 2, and I just have another scriptable object, I just duplicate this. This is going to be, I'm just going to call him Steve-O, and he's got a bit drunk and he's just written a load of weird stuff. Now, if we go back to that handler and we just add Steve-O Irwin in there, we can then press play, and you can see that now that content is from Steve-O and Dave with exactly the information that we specified. And so now as a really quick example that say we click one of these buttons and we want to do something, we can go back to our text message handler, and then we can have a public method called add content. And then what I'm actually going to do is just create some fields to update those specific descriptions on that other UI, which is just going to be text name show and text description show. And then what I'm going to do is exactly like above, is we're going to do the text name show equal to that stuff from the scriptable object that we had before. So with selecting our text message 1, what we can do in this case is on the onClick event, we can add 3 events that we want to do. So in this case, we want to make sure that we hide the text messages menu so that we can go to the game object, string, set that equals false. We want to show the text message display, so we can go game object set active, true. And then in the last case, we want the text message handler, and we want to run the method of add content. It will show this menu, and then it will update the content based on that scriptable object. So from that message again, you can see that we need to add the content title and the content description. And it say you duplicated these, they would work exactly as you want. So now if I close that up and enable that menu again, you can see that when I press play, I can click on Dave McGee and I get a bigger view like we did before to be able to go back to something, to be able to showcase that specific information. And again, then you can control going back. You could have this specific button for going backwards. You could control this in script to be able to turn all of the different elements off, or you could just make sure that all of the different UIs are off and you go back to the main screen and you just enable this like I showed you before. And this is just a few examples of how you can go around and manage your content and start building up the functionality of your smartphone. We have gone through creating some scripting, be able to control some different elements to it, some buttons, and the content which we'll see underneath the buttons. And this is very much based on what you want to create. So do let me know if you want to see some more advances to this, and it will all be up on my Patreon for you to check out. Do check out my Patreon to get access to over another 145 different scripts, assets and projects you cannot find anywhere else. Be sure to come and chat to me on Discord. Check out my great assets on the Unity Asset Store with big bonus discounts on my website. Big thank you to all my patrons, including Peter Steiner, Raheem Whittaker, David76, Gene Pomye, Manos Berakas, Terence Conrad, Gage Linston, Walter Dunson, John Games, Joseph Newman, René Leisure, Darren M, Topher Chambers, Kreshnik Halili, Matt Claudius, Bond of Blood, Ishak Semani, Julian Gonzalez, Gary McGee, and Harry Dobson.